that young mothers never have to go to the gym. All they have to do is lift their child multiple times in an hour. And then when you really want to be energetic, you grab them both and one in each arm and try to lift them. It's amazing to watch. In our gospel passage today, we are struck by the anonymous they. They came to the tomb, taking spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away. They. And we have to wonder at the beginning there as to who are they? And finally, Luke gives us a little hint. The women. Okay, so we cut out half the population. We still don't have a good idea of who these characters are, but we have to keep working our way through the passage. And Luke finally says the women, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and still the ambiguous other women. These women. Mary Magdalene is probably the most familiar to us since we hear her name often in the Gospels. She is actually recorded in all 4 Gospels. She was the woman in which Jesus released the 7 demons that you find in the story in Luke. She was a provider of funds. She provided food, which means she was probably a woman of independent means. It was not uncommon in this era of time for women to support men in their studies and in their ministry work. Early Jewish literature tells us that well-to-do women would support the well-known rabbis and their students so they didn't have to worry about looking and getting the food. They could spend their time studying. Mary Magdalene, we know as the first person to be visited by Jesus after his resurrection. And Mary is a woman who has been known to the disciples for many years. And then there's Joanna. We don't know as much about her. We do know that she is a woman besides Mary who's noted by Luke to also be a follower of Jesus, and she would travel with him from place to place, also supporting him financially. It is a possibility that she was related to Jesus in some manner because she is the wife of one of Herod's stewards that might have also had some connection. And realize we then have Mary, the mother of James. Mary, sort of like the they. It can get very confusing in scriptures with all these Marys because Mary is probably the most common female name you will find in scripture. We find Mary, the mother of James, referred to in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This particular Mary is also a faithful follower and a supporter of Jesus. She traveled with him. She was present at the crucifixion. She helped prepare those spices that they were going to put on his body. And she was with Mary Magdalene when she heard the angel say, Christ has been raised from the dead.
Yes.
In John, we find a very small reference that she was the wife of Cleopas. Doesn't give us a whole lot of information except for her husband's name. But it should be interesting to note that in the Gospel of Mark, whenever he called these women followers, the word for follower is the same exact word as the word used for disciples. These women were disciples of Jesus. They weren't just camp followers. They weren't just the laundress coming behind them. They weren't just a chief cook and bottle washer. They were disciples of Jesus. They heard his teachings. They heard the things that were going on. They were in the places where they met to eat and be taught. Now, it might seem that I'm taking an awful long time talking about a bunch of women this morning, but they do fit into our story. And knowing a bit about these women, especially their status as disciples, makes a huge difference to the rest of this passage. So we have these women. The disciples know them. They're not strangers. They've been traveling with Jesus and the disciples. They've been disciples with the other 12 disciples. They've lived together. They've traveled together. They've learned from Jesus together. They supported the others with their financial resources, providing food, clothing, places to stay. It could have been one of them that arranged for that upper room, for all we know. They worked beside the disciples and the others. And of course, they did their woman's work, like preparing those spices for the body, because that would be considered a womanly task to prepare that for one who has died. It would be a woman's responsibility to make sure those spices got on the body. And that is what they were doing this Sunday morning. They were taking the spices to the tomb to put on the body, not realizing that Nicodemus had already done so. They had the privilege of being the first to enter the tomb. And there they encountered the angels, the men, who tell them Jesus has risen.
Yes.
And they did exactly what probably all of us would do. They took that news and they ran back to the disciples and they told them this exciting news. He has risen.
Mm-hmm.
We have been told this. His body is not there. But not all believed him. There were some who didn't understand the teachings that Jesus had been teaching them. They were still in a state of lack of understanding. There were some who were so into the sorrow of Jesus' death that they couldn't get anything else past their ears. And there were some who were angry because Jesus had not become that warrior Messiah they were looking for. And some just didn't want to know. But the disciples that heard them said to the women, "This is just idle tale." Well, that doesn't sound very offensive. That might be like saying to him, "Oh, you're just giving us a little fib." But in reality, when someone of this era says to you that is an idle tale, they're telling you you're crazy, that you're a mental defective.
Ooh, look pretty.
And this is where the story takes a very strange turn. These women have been with these men.
Yeah.
These women have served with these men. These women have fed these men. These men know these women. And yet they say, "You're crazy. You're a mental defective." It seems so bizarre. But maybe it wasn't idle talk, but really a lack of faith among those who heard what they had to say. And yet there was one, as he's sitting there listening, more than likely the words of Jesus came back to his head. He remembered the things that Jesus had taught, that Jesus had explained to him. And Peter got up and he went to the tomb. He had to see for himself. He might have been one of those people that says, "Oh, I won't believe it until I see it." But he had to go see for himself. He checked out the tomb. He looks in and sees that the linen cloths are lying there, but there isn't a body. I could imagine Peter as he's walking away from the tomb, maybe shaking his head a little bit, maybe being totally amazed, but in his mind it's true. It happened just as he told us it would happen.
Yes.
Jesus rose from the dead.
Yes.
Everything he told us must be true. Many didn't know what to do about at this point. See, they didn't have the rest of the story like we do. We know that this is an exciting Easter morning. And yes, we know that Jesus has been raised from the dead. Glory to God.
Yes.
We know that Jesus will visit his disciples in the coming days to give them final instructions. He will come before Peter and forgive him for his time of denial and fear. we know and celebrate the risen King, the Son of God, that sacrificial lamb that provides salvation for each and every one of us. That is why we are here this morning, to celebrate the risen King.
Yes.
And we know that because of the death that Jesus underwent, he paid the price for all of our sins.
Yes.
Because of Jesus' death, we can be reconciled to God.
Hallelujah.
We know that we can see God face to face. The women knew this. The disciples eventually knew this, and we know it. And if you didn't know before this morning, now you know. Jesus is alive.
Yes.
Jesus has been raised from the dead
Yes.
for you and for I. It's not idle talk. It's not some crazy apparition. It is true. And there are many witnesses. Let us in this place rejoice this morning, this Easter morning, the victory of the risen Lord.
Yes.
Would you rise as you're able to join in together in our hymn?